cannot escape. As you just heard, we are going to be recording this panel discussion. And for the people that are showing up late or didn't hear, we have three panelists today. We have Nicole Burns, who is a settler on Turtle Island and has been living in the traditional territories of the Arawandran, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people for the last decade. And she is a PhD candidate from the Basili School of International Affairs at the University of Waterloo, specializing in global justice and human rights. Then we have Naomi Bird, who is a research facilitator of Indigenous initiatives for the Aniko Indigenous Research Institute and supports the office of the AVP Indigenous Teaching, Learning, and Research. And finally, we have Kahente Horn-Miller, who is a Ganyage Haga scholar, who is an associate vice president of Indigenous Teaching, Learning, and Research at Carleton University, and is the director of Aniko Indigenous Research Institute, as well as an associate professor at the Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies. So for this panel, each presenter will have between 5 to 10-ish minutes to talk about their perspectives on working with Indigenous peoples. And I provided them with 4 questions, which I will put in the chat right now, which might be an opportunity for you to consider how you would approach these questions. And after our esteemed panels will speak, we will open the floor up for questions. You can, if you feel comfortable, you can use your raise a hand emoji and then you can ask the questions, or you can put the questions into the chat and we will get to them as they pop up. So as the speaking order will go Nicole, Naomi, and Kahente. So with no further ado, Nicole, please take it away.
Are you able to allow me to share my screen by chance? And I'll just start talking here. Well,
I'll figure out how to do.
Sure. So like I said earlier, my name is Nicole Burns, and I am non-Indigenous, so I engage in work primarily as an ally in partnership upon invitation. And I think this is, really important to bring to the table my positionality so that you know where I'm coming from and you can understand what I have to say in the lessons that I bring to the table from my positionality. So, and I do apologize, I am struggling with a cold today, so I'm trying really hard to speak clearly for you. I just want to bring to your attention that the theories that I use behind my research, I really intermingle decolonial theory, Indigenous research methodologies, and community-based participatory research, which I'll get into a little bit more as I move through this presentation. I've been working since 2016 as an RA on many research projects where researchers were hired by Indigenous communities to conduct research that the community set the agenda and the research objectives. So only in the past few years I've been leading my own research in partnership with communities. So I do carry a little bit of that perspective into it as well. What it's like being a student working on projects where I'm not necessarily in charge, but have been much more of a learner. And then those relationships that I forged with communities. So I've worked with First Nations all across Canada, as well as Inuit and Nunavut. And I've also done some work in Australia. But primarily I'm based in Canada. So I have a variety of experience, and the people that I've met over the years during my master's research have really followed me through my PhD, and that's where I am today. So that's just a little bit about me. A lot of my work has been influenced by one of my greatest mentors, who's also on my committee for my PhD dissertation. His name is Darren Thomas, and he's from Six Nations. So that's just another piece to keep in mind in terms of where I'm coming from. So I know the last session, some of you may have been a part of that or watched some of the recordings, and I just want to highlight that really like the foundation of doing research with Indigenous communities is that it's based on the 3 R's of Indigenous research, which you may have heard about from Sean Wilson and Cora Weaver-Pillwax talk about this. And just to highlight what that means for me and some of the colleagues that I do work with is that the how and why we go about research is equally as important as the research itself. So the way we interact with one another, with community, we always aim to conduct research in a good way and know that we are upholding our end of the bargain. We also recognize that research is not objective. So it's important to recognize our positionality and what we bring with us, because as much as we've been taught in the Western world for a long time that research can be objective, it's not. We're all biased. We're all taught certain things. We come from different ideologies. So the more we can recognize that and call that out in our own selves and in our research, the more we can be authentic and speak to the results of the research and conduct it in a good way. So this is just an infographic from my own research, and I just bring this up to highlight some of the principles behind what does this actually look like in practice. So it's quite complex, right? There's a lot of pieces here. I mentioned earlier that I incorporate Indigenous research methodologies as well as community-based participatory research, and they overlap in a lot of ways, but there are some distinct differences as well. And there's a reason why I call on both frames, because there are certain things that I think are important. This has been based off of my own reflection and work that I've done. So again, this is something that you can learn from and reflect on for yourself. It may not be exactly how you approach research. We're all different in that way. But one thing I do want to point out is that, I've read a lot of Indigenous scholars and worked with a lot of Indigenous scholars and reflecting on, is it appropriate to use Indigenous research methodologies as a non-Indigenous person? And it's a very personal thing, of course, but the big thing is that the commitment to using Indigenous research methodologies is that Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous voices are amplified. So my commitment in that front is to, allow space and, not try to take up space. So this also feels a little weird doing the presentations. I typically, sit in the back and help do whatever needs to be done. But this is stuff that I bring up because it's extremely important in doing this work in a good way. And I could talk on this side of things for a very long time, but I know we don't have a bunch of time. So I'm just going to skip through here and then move to some of the more practical pieces where this is put into practice. So I know that from the last session, there were a lot of questions of like, what does this mean in practice? So I just put together a little table here, just some thoughts to keep in mind when it comes to designing the research, the methods that you're using, and then the knowledge sharing pieces of the research. So the first one here, we say grounded in 4 R's. I know it's originally the 3 R's. A lot of people I work with, we've added a 4th R called relevance, because as Gabe was saying earlier, a lot of research has been extractive and has been not to the advantage of Indigenous communities whatsoever. So relevance is really highlighting that it's needed and wanted by the Indigenous communities that you're working with. You're not coming into the research with some idea on your own and then projecting that desire on them. It's relevant. So that's just an added R there. And in all of the work that I've done, all of our research teams have always incorporated an advisory committee from within the community. And then they can help you figure out who would be best to be on that committee. But it's really a way to ensure that there's checks and balances between the research team and the community. And they can help, design the project. It should really be, as this next point says, community as collaborators, partners, and participants. it really should be co-designed from the beginning with community, right? So this is before, you have your REB and all that, you're working with community. Ideally, your relationship is formed before the research is even being proposed. And you're collaborating on the best ways to go about this, the best ways to structure. And you might have read about OCAP principles, or you know of them, especially if you have the TCPS2 certificate. But this is something that's really important to work into your research, and it does help guide you through some of the questions that Gabe put in the chat around data sovereignty, ownership and control and access. That's very First Nation specific. So other Indigenous peoples across the world might have different systems that are similar to OCAP. So that's just to keep that in mind. And along that same vein, just know that you want to get ethics approval, not only from your institution, but also from the community that you're working with. Oftentimes there are research ethics set up within the community. You might need a research agreement. You should have a research agreement regardless with community. That's done with legitimate authority within the community. So these are all things to keep in mind on the practical side of the design and approach of the research. And then when it comes to methods, there's no just blanket method that you can use when working with community. It really is based off of each community, how they do things, what's important to them, their culture. So you want to work with your community advisory committee to kind of decide, what makes the most sense here? Is it going to be storytelling? Is it going to be sharing circles? Are we going to do one-on-one interviews? What's it going to look like? And continuing that relationship building throughout the whole time, right? Building trust. Oftentimes, the language and ceremony should be included as appropriate. And this is something that your advisory committee and the community can really advise you on, right? Because it's not the same everywhere. And every nation is different. Every Indigenous group is different. So you can't just think that, there's this one fit that's going to work everywhere. I've been privileged to be a part of many different projects, and there's oftentimes ceremony is worked in terms of language. I've worked with a lot of elders, so needing a translator to be present to make sure that the methods are appropriate, that everyone can participate, and that it's relevant for everyone. So it would be unfortunate to not hear from people who English isn't the first language, for instance. So these are just things to keep in mind. Also, to be inclusive of elders and youth. And that might not always be a factor, but more often than not, it is a desire of community to have the viewpoints and the involvement of elders and youth in the project. And a lot of the work that I've done has been around land rights, and it can be a very very heavy topic. So needing to work in that there's appropriate supports and that it's a safe space so people can have a way to debrief after or have an appropriate connection afterwards is something to think about if you're, always in your research, but especially if it's something that's really triggering or heavy. And then finally, just to talk about the knowledge sharing piece, community should be part of the planning. I say this a lot, but you can't say it too much. Community should be a part of the knowledge sharing planning and process. It should be iterative and happening at all phases of the research. So a lot of times what this looks like in my work is that we do community presentations throughout the project and share where we're at, what we've learned. And then things might come up in that time. Like, we really want to share, we want to talk about this thing, which is loosely connected to the research, but not directly connected to the research. Can we have a workshop? And that's something that, to be willing and to be a part of those things at the request of community. And also sharing information in an accessible way. So what that looks like is, traditionally in Western research, we might think, oh, we'll write a manuscript at the end. But in this case, it's, wanting to write a plain language report that's has infographics and visuals in it to share back with the community and see what they want to do with information. Also, something that I really try to do is to make sure that the knowledge being shared is strengths-based and rights-based. There's so much detriments-focused research conducted around Indigenous peoples, and that's a whole other topic in and of itself, but just trying to highlight the strengths is something that is big for community-based participatory research. And then lastly, in connection with this, is that, community has the opportunity to co-author and co-present findings at conferences and other things that they might be interested in. This is a lot of information in a short period of time. Like, could talk about all this a lot more, but this is just some of the highlights that come from each phase of the project that I want to point out in terms of practical lessons. And then for those of you who are new to this, I would just suggest a good place to start is to read Research's Ceremony by Sean Wilson. Read as many Indigenous authors as you can, especially around methodologies and practice, but this is a good starting point. It's very easy to read and very straightforward, which I really encourage you to pick up. And I will leave it at that for now and pass it on to the other speakers. So thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, kind of cool. Okay, so next up, we will be hearing from Naomi Bird.
Hey, yeah, once again, I'm Naomi Bird. I'm from Thunderchild First Nation. I am a Thunderchild originally. I'm fifth generation Thunderchild, which means my great-great-grandfather was Chief Thunderchild. My father is from Thunderchild. He's Cree, Plains Cree. My mother is Anishinaabe from Roseau River, Manitoba. So this is kind of within that region that we kind of reside in. I am the research facilitator Indigenous initiatives at Onaco, but I also support the AVP Indigenous Teaching, Learning, and Research. And so as kind of like the two-faceted role, we've been able to move Onaco forward in the best capacity that we need to at the moment. And I think one of the stages that we have met, I guess, where we would meet researchers primarily is when they're willing to conduct the research. So they've had the classes, they've gone through that process, but now they're at those initial planning stages. If it's done correctly, we'll say, they're at those initial planning stages and they want consult or they want some resources or some direction. However, we also get those who are in the policy stage, or sorry, the proposal stage, and they're trying to move forward. And so just kind of, that's where we would meet them. So previous speaker, Nicole, would be at that student levels researcher stage. And so mine's a little bit different. I do have a document that I'd like to share. I don't know if that's available. Not right here. All right, so with Onaco, what we've done is we've created the Indigenous Research Ethics Assessment. So what this does is it takes the OCAP principles into mind, because it is included within them, but it also takes those larger questions that we are usually asked with Onaco. So is there a prior informed consent? Like, have you reached out to the community at all? A good research method is to do everything with us, right? And nothing without us. So if you keep that in mind when you're moving forward with your research or you're about to conduct research, then a lot of the research that you would be thinking would be more strengths-based as opposed to not, right? And so there is a tendency to, when you're conducting or you're applying for your proposal, that there's a checkbox for, does this benefit Indigenous people? And usually that's checked. Yes, it does. But there was no discussion prior. There was no maybe conversation with Indigenous peoples if they wanted this research. or it tends to be more, yes, it'll benefit because they're lacking in this. Whereas a lot of good data and good research needs to benefit Indigenous people. And if it takes those benefits into consideration, then a lot of the research would be more supportive. And so that's one of the things that you can see when you're reviewing a proposal is whether or not this was considered from the onset, as opposed to when you get to that point. And so if you take those major questions, we took what we would generally see, the OCAP principles, and what was consulted by our Indigenous communities and our Indigenous faculty on Carleton. We took those, we compiled this document, which will support that proposal stage. So within here, we have the criteria and we have a score. So this is your standard rubric. This rubric does indicate a score between 1 to 5. It is not necessarily a pass or fail in the regard where, okay, everyone needs to have a 5. But if you want your research to be clear, done adequately or appropriately, then you may want to lean further towards the 5. And so how can we strengthen your proposal? With ONICO, what we do is we can meet to have that initial pre-planning stage. Okay, where are you? What would you like to do? Here are our connections to help you help support your research. But also we do, we do the initial, but we also will help within the process as well. At this current, like right now, our website is under revision. And very shortly, it's going to have those connections and those supports. So you have your resources that are on there, how to access support at Carleton, who's what's our IRAB process, those kind of things. And so everything will be accessible very shortly. That'll help. And this tool will be posted as well. And so what this is it provides our researchers access to immediate supports. So and want very highly to ensure that the research that comes out of Carleton is beneficial to Indigenous people and that is respectful. And so this is why we created this document, and I'll just go through it really, really quickly. And so within here, you are able to self-score. So you could take your proposal, review it under these components, but then you can also meet with ONICO and say, okay, could you help me walk me through this? Maybe you haven't done it. Maybe you've approached it in a different way that after reviewing, you realize, okay, maybe I need some help. We'll walk you through it. We'll help you through this process as well. And so this also is going to be used by a lot of our reviewers. So we also, at Carleton, we do have an Indigenous Research Ethics Board that is in the pilot stage this year. This was created under consultation with Indigenous communities and Indigenous peoples here and around Carleton area. And so that is going to be, I guess, rolling out very, very shortly as well. So if you take a look at this, you'll see the Indigenous research methodologies, all of our major considerations. All of these have been reviewed and vetted with our Indigenous faculty. So they have gone through these questions and the criteria as well. And so much like Nicole mentioned, there are many Indigenous research methodologies. So we include those, and we also put some little extras in there like surveys, reports, and interviews. And so it's not just a standard interview. When you're doing research with Indigenous people, it does require a circular relationship. So you do have to approach it with early in the onset to know that you are going to be returning. And that work I guess all the work that you put forward in this research needs to be returned to the community in a good way. And that means that that information needs to actually benefit them. So as an educator for many years, we've had researchers come into the community, meet with our students, and then drop off a document and never return. But a good researcher and good research practice takes into consideration that if you are using the knowledges, you have an ownership to return those knowledges intact and with their intent. Nothing should be manipulated. That goes with most of our stories. When our stories and our information are shared, you ensure that the owner of those stories still has them. We don't take them, we don't manipulate them. And so if the research, like if you're doing an interview and you're hearing from the elder their stories, you're not only hearing the words, you're hearing the intent and the meaning behind those words. Those have to be gathered through a process in which you're sitting and you're attaining that knowledge in a meaningful and respectful way. We call it a good way. So if you're meeting in a good way, which requires protocol, which requires an awareness and a respect on how to engage with Indigenous elders, knowledge keepers, that once you have those and you put them down on paper, you're taking only the words, and you have to make sure that that meaning is still intact. And so when that research is completed, going back to the community is a necessary step, as it takes those words back and say, did I capture this adequately? You're not going to capture it all. You aren't, and they shouldn't be. But did you capture it adequately? And so one of the better ways that I've seen it done is with actually Maggie Kovach's work. She was able to do this effectively, in where she discussed the whole process of gathering this information through storying. And so you take the stories, and when you share that story, it should have an intent that's included in there. And so I'm kind of getting a little sidetracked, but this is the research methodologies area. And so it's not just necessarily, yes, I'm doing a research. Yes, I spoke with the community. Yes, it's all in there. So if you take a look at the end here, it says Indigenous stakeholders are effectively consulted and included in a knowledge transfer agreement plan. Indigenous stakeholders have a decision-making authority and they feel they have included adequately to the OCAP principles. So that is returning the knowledges. Is this what we've captured? Have we captured it appropriately? Would you like to take in, or would you like to review this, or would you like me to edit? And that's the other thing, is it is circular. So you may be required to edit if you didn't approach this in a meaningful way, or if it wasn't captured the way it needed to be captured. And I hate the word captured, but that's what I'm using right now, just for lack of a better word. So here's more of our criteria. Just doing it nice and slow, so you could probably take a look at it. If you take a look at the back end here, the same thing. Research will result in benefiting the building capacity, infrastructure, human resources, and expertise of Indigenous stakeholders. So data sovereignty is important, incredibly important, as it can impact the lands and the resources and the access to those territories. And so just to ensure that what you're returning does benefit Indigenous peoples, right? So that's why that component is in there as well. Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing. So taking those, I guess we also created like a little definition here for you, or for the person who's going to be reading it, and then they can kind of see, okay, here's what we need to do. One of the things that I've mentioned before is when it comes to Indigenous Research Ethics Board, we are short in capacity, right? Not every Indigenous person is expected to be all-knowing and know the answer to every subject. We don't know everything. And so if we take that into account and we take this tool, say I'm sitting on an IREB for a review and it's science-based and I'm not a science expert, so I would take this document and help guide my own work so I can compare, okay, are these components within this document? All right, so just going back to number 5, I like to refer to the number 5 because that is the ideal, right? That's where we would like to be. And so Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing are provided precedents regarding transfer of knowledge, methods, analysis, interpretation of use, data, and their role throughout the project. The key word here is also throughout the project. So if this wasn't a consideration on the initial stage, then you're going to have to reconsider the process that happened after. What I mean by that is if you're saying, I want this to do this research, but you don't take the Indigenous component into consideration until midpoint, then you're going to have to kind of look at your work again, because our process to gathering and sharing those knowledges is from the onset, right? You have to build those relationships. You have to establish that relationship within the community in order to effectively share our knowledges. So that's one of the initial stages there. If we scroll through, you'll see the ownership, control, access, and possession. So those are the OCAP principles. But in addition, we intertwine them with a lot of the questions and the information feedback that we had here at Carleton and within the communities. And so if you take a look at the other area, like underneath ownership, so there's the definition of what ownership is, but it's also Indigenous identity or membership in an Indigenous community is a factor in the data analysis, so subgroup analysis. So just if you haven't gone through the OCAP principles, or if you're not aware of the OCAP principles, I'm going to direct you to the First Nations Information Governance Center. They'll be able to help you out further with that as well, which is where we took some of their information. We borrowed, and with permissions. I have to be really careful with that. I'm a teacher. We always say we steal, but we don't really steal without permission. So there you go. All right, so I'll scroll through just a little bit further. When we go down here, I wanted just to highlight where this information came from as well. So not only is it our information at Carleton and our communities, but also we took the OCAP principles from the First Nations Information Governance Center, but we took the design of the rubric from what's called the Indigenous Research Level of Engagement tool here at the Saskatchewan Center for Patient-Oriented Research. That is more medical based. And so it's a good practice in that their standard mandate for research is, quote, do no harm, right? So if you take that into consideration when they built this tool, then it was done in a really good approach, but we were able to take that and kind of fill it into our to meet our own criteria. So that is the, hold on, let me stop sharing here or else I might get stuck there. Yeah, so that is just the quick overview of what we've done in Carleton. So like I said, just to kind of reiterate, we did the ethics assessment tool. We've done the Indigenous Research Ethics Board. We are revamping our website to include more research tools and resources for researchers. And it's not just researchers at Carleton, although there are components on the page that will only be accessible through Carleton. But there are resources that you can be shared and those kind of things that are there. We also have a lot of our visiting scholar who is going to be posting videos. We have our previous visiting scholar videos that are posted there, and we have Indigenous content experts, knowledge keepers, videos, interviews, and talks that are being shared there. And yeah, like Kahonde just mentioned, we have a new visiting scholar, Maria Carcelin, who will be starting very, very shortly. I think today was her first day. And so she'll be coming to Carleton, but she won't be teaching or doing the talks until the fall. Then we'll have our second visiting scholar starting in January. So we're really excited for this new term. But yeah, that's everything that I have. I may have gone over 10 minutes. I don't know. But I'm a teacher. I tend to talk. So, all right. Thank you.
Great, Nyaogoa. Thank you so much. And finally, we have Dr. Kahente Horn-Miller.
Great, thanks. Not to just to highlight what the extensive work that Naomi has done on developing this process as part of the IREB, the Indigenous Research Ethics Board, that will be starting, we think, in the fall. So this will mean that any research that contains is about Indigenous people or with Indigenous people will be put through that process. But further communication will be happening and educational in the next few months leading up to the fall when we start implementing that process. Just to say that, but Naomi has been a huge part of developing the tools as part of it. I'd like to share with you my PowerPoint. I said I didn't have one, but I ended up thinking about these questions with regards to your statement, Gabriel, about the fact that people want to know how to implement, right? We can talk about the theory, we can talk about the methods, but let's see how it's implemented. So I'm actually going to show you an example. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen. Hold on a sec. There we are. And there we go. Okay, slideshow. And how's that? Can you see that? Yes? Okay, great. So as I said before in my intro, you know, I have the great fortune of being able to continue doing research. I've been applying for partnership grants and community engaged grants, and I've been working with one of my former students, Rebecca Ingram, who finished her doctorate in the School of Geomatics and Linguistics. And so it's actually this particular research project was developed out of her thinking that she did and the work that she did for her doctorate on mapping Ganyageha place names. So Ganyageha is the language of my people and Gabriel's people. And so when I was supervising her doctoral work, she was really looking at and mining all kinds of maps and all kinds of journals that are in existence to really figure out what the traditions are around the way that our people would name places. And one of the biggest things that she realized, I remember, and one of her main findings was that when we would name places, in order to understand the name of that place or space, and places and spaces have multiple names. There's not just one, like in the Western mapping tradition, Montreal has one name, it's Montreal. Ottawa has one name, it's Ottawa, right? And they're usually named after, you know, relevant individuals in the colonial record, shall we say. But in the Ganyagehaga naming traditions, it was all about land use. So it could have multiple names. And the only way to really understand what that name was and what it meant in the context of that space, you had to be sitting on the water. Because sitting on the water was our highway. So in order to really understand that place name, you had to be sitting there. And so we took that and we developed this project called the Atlas of Mohawk Space. So I'm just gonna. So you know, this is a presentation that we give on this particular project, and of course, it's always important to recognize that we are working in another nation's territory. She and I both live in another nation's territory. She's not Indigenous. But is really quite well versed in allyship in terms of the research process. So this is us. This is Rebecca and I in Tyndonega in your territory, Gabriel, by the water. It was on one of our original sessions that we did. So we had originally planned, and this is just as the lockdown happened, to go into Mohawk communities and teach people how to use this Mohawk Atlas that we had developed. Now, this atlas is based on the Nunavut mapping system, that was developed by Fraser Taylor and his team in the Carleton Geomatics Institute. So what they did was they created a map for us, because if you use Google Maps or if you use Apple Maps, and here's the issue about Indigenous data sovereignty and ownership of data, is that whatever you put into those maps is owned by them. So we really, what goes into this map is culture, it's language, it's history, it's pictures, it's video, all created and all put in place by our people, by the Kanien'kehá:ka. So if we were to put that into the Apple Maps or Google Maps, it would be putting in jeopardy the intellectual property, the ownership of our collective people. And we can't do that. We can't put our collective knowledge in jeopardy. So we have this map that was created for us out of a series of photographs, satellite images, and then we've used it to create this atlas that we use. So the origins of this project come out from what I said is her dissertation. And as I mentioned, the significance of Indigenous place names is that oftentimes they borrowed non-Indigenous naming conventions. So you often see this in a lot of the names that are given to certain places. But and what we feel it represents is that it's an Indigenous knowledge of the land. So if you don't know this, Canada means is a Kanien'kehá:ka term for the community, right? Kanata. And so, but you have to really excavate the history and you have to speak to the speakers in order to figure out exactly what these names mean. So what names do is they provide the linguistic, the geographical, environmental, cultural, and historical information about that place. So they talk about the different names given to places. And as I said before, there's multiple names that are given, speak to the way that we engaged with the land. So when we went into community to work with community folks on, putting in information into this map, we really had to be mindful of the fact that, right, they own the data. How are we going to create this map so that only they have access to it, meaning they're the only ones that can put things into this map, but also, and change things in the map. But also we've put in a layer that is all about biodiversity, because we have the issue ongoing in many, many communities with the emerald ash borer impacting ash trees. And baskets are a huge part of our culture, Mi'kmaq culture, Abenaki culture, and the ash tree is being decimated by the emerald ash borer. So we decided that this summer we would go back to Akwesasne and work with the kids, and I'll explain a little bit more about that, but to really document the biodiversity that is still in existence. But to do that to collect that knowledge and put it into the map with these children and with community folks, you have to be mindful that this is theirs. So how do we create a project that will recognize their intellectual sovereignty over that data and be mindful of it and also protect it? So this is an answer to some of the questions that you put forward, Gabriel. So if we lose languages, right? So the whole underlying purpose of this map of the atlas is to connect people with the old naming traditions and with the land use and with the language that is used around our people engaging with those spaces and places. So when you lose those names and you lose the history around those names of those places, you lose a lot of the knowledge and the connection to that place. So if we think about the Western mapping tradition, right, which is we have all these lines, roads bisecting, barriers, borders, things like that. and you can see them very clearly on maps, right? But when you take all that away, what do you see? You see the land formation. You see the waters, right? And so our map, as I'll show you, will explain a little bit more of this. And this is a little bit about more about the atlas of Kanien'kehá:ka space, which is, you can actually find it. It's mohawkatlas.org. And as I said, it comes out of the Nunavut framework, and it's meant to document names. So when we applied and when we do the work, we're using that system that protects Indigenous knowledge. It's an open source platform designed for use in Indigenous communities. We adhere to OCAP and CARE principles, and it protects the Indigenous data. So De Oha de Gaswanta is known as the Turo, and that's really the guiding principles in terms of how it guides the way that we do research. So we don't impose our ways and thinking on others. It's more coming together to go along the same path. And that's really important. I think thinking through how to do ethical research is, how can I'm Kanien'kehá:ka, how can I do this with using the philosophy of my people to guide the way that I'm doing research in another community that is not my own. I have relatives there, so I have to be very respectful of them. But how do I, oops, it keeps jumping on me. Here we go. I have to figure out a way for my own traditions to guide me. And my traditions are rooted in this whole understanding of respect and reciprocity. So here is what's known as the Atlas of Kanien'kehá:ka space. And as I said before, it's made up of images that were pieced together from satellite photographs, right? And so what we do is when we go into community, we teach community people how to use this map, how to put documents into it, how to put language, how to put photographs. This will be the third year. We've been holding a children's camp, a day camp for a week in Akwesasne. And we teach the young kids how to use drones. We pair them with elder language speakers, and we have them work together with those elders paired up on a specific place in Akwesasne or around Akwesasne that is, maybe beyond the colonizers' borders, but traditionally ours. And they work to document that place. So by using the drone to take the footage, the history of it, through the oral history, they record it. They take photographs or they collect documents, and then they can put that into the map. And then that can become available for anyone who wants to have a look at this map. And what I did as part of my project was I bought a huge touchscreen for the library that we've been working with in Akwesasne on the American side, so that anyone coming into the library can now access this map, and it becomes a resource in the library. But then too, it becomes a tool for them when they have guest presenters or things like that coming in. They can use this big screen. So it's a dual purpose, right? So we were really mindful of how do we ensure that this work that we're doing, the ongoing work, is available to the community on an ongoing basis. It's not just put into a book, put into a research paper, and kind of tucked away on the shelf. It's actually an ongoing living map, because what we're teaching these young kids and the elders is how to use their phones, how to use tablets to go home, and they can document the different places and the histories of these spaces that they have in their own families, right? That they know of in their own families. And so it's an ongoing process. And we found that, many people continue to contribute to this map, even beyond the sessions that we've held in communities and in the summer camp. So as I said, you know, we funded the original camp through the Native Indian Brotherhood Fund. And then we held it again, it's SSHRC funded again. So we have enough funding for 2 more years. So what we're using is, we're doing is teaching youth to use Earth observation technologies, to capture this aerial imagery. We also are having the elders work with them to talk about the past use of landscape features. And then using Ganyageha, the language, it's in the map, they put it into the map to describe those spaces and places. And so we're developing this technique called mentor and apprentice technique, which is about language revitalization and preservation of understanding of our lands and territories. So here's just some pictures. We took the kids out on the waters of the St. Lawrence last year, droning on the St. Lawrence. That's a common thing that we've been doing. We also teach them about the basketry. So that, as I said, this year we'll be we've put in a layer on the map, which is going to be a private layer. It's about biodiversity of the area. And we're really going to have the students engage on the ash trees, the emerald ash borer, as though we're going to have them work and make baskets, and then connect the language with with what they're doing with the baskets, and also with the land. So this is an ongoing project that you know, we've been doing. So as we've noted, Indigenous data sovereignty means that we have our own right to own, control, access, and steward this data, which is, I think, I've been showing you is a good example of how to do it. The data management and the collection strategies must align with how we do things within our community and our nation and our people. It also means that the ongoing you know, work is done in partnership. So we have Ryan Ransom, as you saw, he was the one working the drone. He's our community liaison, and he works with students at the local college. So he's been working with us on this project as our community liaison. And this atlas, as I mentioned, is owned by the community. At the camp end, we always invite families to learn from the children as to what they did. And we get continued feedback from those who participate on the atlas and what we can do. And that's how we developed this new layer that will look at the biodiversity. So here's a really good book that I just finished last night. I'm actually interviewing her, Jennifer Grenz, tomorrow at the Writers Festival in Ottawa. But she captures a lot of what we've been talking about here today, and some of the other conversations that you've been having around the ethics of doing research with Indigenous peoples, where she's looking at it from the issue of restoration ecology. And I think she presents in a very interesting way a good story. She's very much a storyteller, and I think you'd really enjoy reading this book. So I encourage you to get it. So that's all I have for you right now.
Great, y'all go. That was a really cool presentation. The Atlas map looks really cool. So with the last 25-ish minutes, do we have any questions from the audience? Again, if you're willing, please unmute to ask the questions. We'll raise your hand and then unmute, or if not, you can pop your questions into the chat. Well, while people are thinking of their questions, I have a question for all the panelists, and this was a term that was brought up a couple of times, and I was wondering if you folks could talk about what is strength-based research versus a deficit-based research, because that's a pretty core concept at Indigenous research.
I can take a first stab at that. Strength-based research is looking at what do we have left? Like, for example, the work that I've been doing with the Mohawk community is on language. There's lots of language and knowledge left, despite the efforts of the residential schooling system, the Canadian government to erase us. We still have a lot of knowledge and language that surrounds the activities and the places that we live. And it's about looking at, those things and really bringing them forward and seeing value in them and asking and working with community folks to begin to record, because what we've been learning actually is when you mine these old documents like Cartier's journals and whatnot for names about, let's say, Montreal, you know, there's a process that you can use where you bring in elders into those spaces, Indigenous elders or Mohawk elders, to really examine the words. And by being in those spaces and really thinking through the words, it's like, and this is how they've described it, it's like you're awakening that knowledge that kind of lay dormant for a long time because of the lack of use of those terms or the weakening of the language over time, because they haven't used certain concepts or words. And so it really kind of evokes a regeneration of the knowledge around those concepts. And so I think of that as a strengths-based approach rather than looking at things from a deficit model. I think it's really important to shift things and look at things from, okay, what do we have left and what can we build upon?
Great. Yeah, that's really it's a good way of looking at it. It's a good way of describing it. Naomi or Nicole, if you want to jump in, otherwise we can move on to a question from Stephen Schott.
I'll just quickly add that I know that this is especially true in health research. I have a friend who's an Indigenous nurse, and we were just talking about this the other day, and she said, it's so exhausting to be reading through and doing a scoping review about Indigenous nurse efforts, and every single article starts off with all of these, bad things that exist in communities. And it's like, well, at this point, there was a time when we needed to talk about some of the bad things that were happening because of colonialism, but now it's like it's said all the time that if you pull up any health journal, there's almost just a reiteration of the same thing over and over again. But how can we approach those issues by drawing attention to the strengths that exist in community, as was said already? But just keep in mind, I think the way that you write and draw attention to things is also really important, not just with the research itself, but what you're reporting on and how you paint the picture.
Great. Yeah. With that, unless Naomi, you want to speak to that, if not, I can move on to the next question.
No, actually, I'm good. We can move on.
Okay, great. So from Stefan Schott, we have a question specifically for Cahente. Are the youth getting interested in using the Atlas and working with elders in entering new information?
Yeah. So what we've been finding is when we go to look at the map, we find more and more points on it, which says that they're using it or they're teaching others how to use it, which is exactly what we wanted. The way that we know that there are more users is that they have to sign up for an account. So you have to be Mohawk to be a user of this. So you could do it if you wanted, if you had history around certain spaces and places, because we have gone to Tyndonega to do that, to give a workshop. So, that's how we're finding out that people are using this map. And then there's a desire to use this in the school as a teaching tool, right? Where you can use this, even I think, even in a university classroom, I think it would be a great way to you could use it as a teaching tool in some of our classes to show, what exactly do we mean by ethical research, but also what do we mean by, what is the land back movement? What is sovereignty around land? an understanding of land, right? Because what this is doing is shifting that understanding of what our lands are all about, what our relationship to land is all about. It can be used for land-based learning as well. So there's many different applications, I think, of something like this. And with that, as we communicate that, I think we're going to see more and more users because whoever uses it seems to really enjoy using it.
Great.
Thanks.
And we have a question from Lynn.
Hi there, thank you. I'm worried now after hearing all you guys. Only because, as I said, I'm just kind of jumping in here at the request of somebody who says, Lynn, do this, do that, because we want to use the information. I think I'm still okay, but I want to confirm something that I'm doing with you, and if you can give me some brief feedback, I'd appreciate it. So my main role in helping with the research for the development of the website is that I contact my sister, who is 93 years old, and she's not in good health. So, what I've been doing, because I've been asked to do it and I don't mind, and she loves it herself, by the way. I call her, I say, tell me some stories, pick. Just tell me what you remember from living on reserve back then, 80, 70 years ago, and tell me what you remember. And what I've done is I record it. However, I've made sure that she understands what we're doing, how we can use her words that I'm recording, that I'm going to transcribe it, and is she okay with that? So on the recording, I have her permission to do this. So moving forward a little bit quicker, that's what I'm doing. And is it okay? Am I doing enough, or is this so complicated that I don't even know what I'm doing? Thank you.
Personally, I would say at the basic level, you're doing what you should be doing, because this is a community generated project, right? It's not something
absolutely
from university or a student coming into community to do this.
No.
Perhaps educating, putting in a community newspaper. Okay, this is the project. You will be approached to contribute your voice to this website. We will need to get your permission, but we're going to outline to you everything that is going to come of this project. What are the goals here, right? I think it's important to be very transparent in terms of what is this website you're developing? Why are you doing it? What are the long-term goals, right? And, give them the option to opt out. I think if they decide that at some point they don't want their story in there, they can have it removed, or the family members can have it removed, right? If that's something that they want. And I think having some sort of written agreement where you keep track of and outline to those you're getting the stories from, to explain to them, this is why we're doing it. Here's all of the things that you need to consider before you sign on. And right there, outline if at some point you want to have your story removed, or your family members want it removed after you're gone as a legacy, or whatever, as a legacy decision, then they can, right? And give them a copy, give them a copy, and then also keep a copy for yourself in a safe place. I think, approaching things like this in community in a very transparent way is the way to do it. And it seems to me, and others might have other viewpoints on it, but like you're doing it in the right way.
Thank you.
Actually, kind of bouncing off of this discussion, and something that Naomi you raised when you were talking about ensuring you have protocols for returning research to the community, because that is important, particularly because life gets busy and one thing ends and then another thing starts up. So I was wondering if you folks would be willing to provide some examples of what returning research or returning the end results of a project to a community looks like or can look like.
Sure. So a good example too is, say for instance, if you're doing interviews and you're having those interviews recorded, it is a good to have those recorded because those stories, they, like I said, they do mention there's a lot of expression and things that are kind of context that's missed when you're writing a story down. And if you have that recorded, you can return that to the family, or if you return it to the person. I know this is important just from our family experience. My grandfather, a lot of his stories were recorded by the Cultural Center here in Saskatchewan. And upon his passing, they returned the videos, they returned the recordings, the audio, the songs back to the family to say, here's your grandfather's work. Here's what he has. We also have a copy here if you ever need it. And so that's a good way to return and still have it living. So you can still hear my grandfather's songs. You can hear how it can be used in different things. And a lot of people still use his songs at powwows, and it's returned back. So when they use his songs, they actually acknowledge him. And so it's there. It's a means for us to say, yes, this is his story. So I think that's a good example of how to return. There are other ways to return back to the community, like Kahande mentioned, returning the screen as a tool for the community use. But yeah, that's just one of my examples.
Yeah, I would say, we returning the information about the map, the place names on an ongoing basis is by making this a public tool, right? So even all of you can have a look at this atlas, but you can't add to it, right? Only the Mohawks who are part of this can contribute to this map, but we all benefit and they benefit, right? So that's a good example of how to do it in a large scale way. There are other ways, and I've done these in the past with other projects, is, give back transcriptions or recordings, like Naomi has mentioned, back to community, back to family members. As well, I've been involved in research projects where we created a video to share and disseminate the results of that project back to community in a visual way. So really, this is taking into consideration that many people don't have time to read stuff, read a paper, read a journal article, whatever. But if you put a video on, let's say, the public network so I don't know about you guys, but Kahnawake has its own channel. And so they put that on there, or they put it on the website, one of the websites for the community. And that's how you can disseminate the information back to community. So there's multiple ways to do this that really don't cost a lot, but enable community folks to engage with and find out what the research found.
Great. Yeah, and I'm just been poking around on that Mohawk Atlas, and it seems like an opportunity to put some Mohawk place names to Ottawa to take it from the Algonquins, as is a longstanding tradition.
I don't know. We've been very cautious of that because of the fact that it's about, we have to be very mindful and respectful of the people's history and knowledge. If we start to say, well, this is Mohawk territory, and without, and try to force that perspective on another nation, that's not adhering to the two-row.
Mm.
So we have to be very mindful of that. So there are people that say this is, there are Mohawk names for places here, and there may be, but right now this is not the time and the space to do that. I think you have to undergo a large scale consultation where you have both the Mohawks and the Algonquin people meet to discuss this. And we're not there yet by any means at all. So I think it's really important, you know, to really think those kinds of things through before we go ahead and do things like that.
Oh, and we have, I guess this will be the last question. This is from Stefan Schott.
Only if nobody else has a question. I already had a question. So if, I like to get, if others have a question, please go ahead. But otherwise, I mean, I can also talk with Kahente afterwards, but I'm very interested because I also work with Nunallit in with Inuit partners. And I have a question with, and also with actually Dene in the Satu area. And so I have a question about the biodiversity module. How are you intending to use this? Is this just a reflection of biodiversity in the area, or also to look, because you mentioned ash trees that are being damaged, to document changes on the land and for biomonitoring? Are you intending to use it for that as well?
One of it's important to remember that when you're in an Indigenous community, they're stewards of the land, right, of their own territory. That means stewards looking after the fish populations, looking after the traditional medicines. And if you start documenting that and putting that into a public facing map to say this is where this is, they can be overpicked and overharvested, right? So what we're doing is we're using the map, the atlas, as a teaching tool with the kids, and we're going to begin to have them document these spaces, but it's going to be closed to the public. It's only going to be accessible if you are a Kanien'kehá:ka, a Mohawk, right? So that is taking into consideration the data sovereignty, that issue of that knowledge is for us. It's like traditional ceremonies, right? And songs and dances. We don't share that outward. We're not supposed to, right? Those are for our people. But there are other things that we can share, for sure. You know, so it's things like that that you have to be very cognizant of. And when you are in dialogue and in relationship with a community, they'll tell you, okay, you can't share this. And we seem to, you know, we have more of a voice nowadays than we did before, where, you know, there's many instances of, you know, anthropologists and whatnot and scientists coming into our communities and taking knowledge and leaving with it and then making it part of their making their career off of it. But that, you know, hopefully doesn't happen too much very often. So this is a way to be mindful and respectful of the Akwesasne knowledge around the ash trees, about the emerald ash borer, but also the fish populations, traditional medicines and things that continue to be in the oral history of our people, in the oral knowledge base of our people.
Okay. So we are at 1:33. So I think that about does it. Thank you so much to Kahente, Naomi, and Nicole for taking the time out of your busy days to talk to us about the process of research. Thank you to everyone who has attended this to listen. And we will hopefully be having another. This is a part of an ongoing discussion, and there will be definitely more opportunities to discuss this important work. And I thank you again to 3CI for putting this on. It's been absolutely wonderful. Nyawa Goa again, Nyawa Goa to the panelists and Nyawa Goa to the audience.